The secret to turning your hobbies into income. The kitchen timer went off for the third time that morning, but she didn't move. Her hands were covered in paint, not from crafts with the kids, but from something she'd started just for herself. The guilt crept in the same way it always did, whispering that this wasn't productive, that hobbies were luxuries she couldn't afford. But somewhere between the chaos of breakfast and the silent house after drop-off, a different question had started to form. What if this thing I love could actually love me back? She wasn't dreaming of empires or escape. She was thinking about freedom measured in smaller units, the ability to say yes to a field trip without checking her bank account first, the kind of independence that doesn't announce itself but quietly changes everything. Most days, ambition felt like a word that belonged to someone else. Someone without sippy cups lining the counter and permission slips scattered across the table. But that morning, with paint still drying on canvas and coffee growing cold in her favorite mug, something shifted. She opened her phone, not to scroll, but to search. And what she found wasn't a business plan. It was permission she'd been waiting for someone else to give. According to recent data, more than 60% of women who start home-based businesses do so by monetizing skills they already have. Skills they'd been practicing for years without ever calling them valuable. The craft they did to decompress. The organizing system they'd perfected out of necessity. The advice they gave freely to friends, never imagining anyone would pay for it. The market wasn't asking for perfection. It was asking for authenticity, consistency, and the willingness to start before feeling ready. She thought about the women in her online groups, the one selling printable planners she designed during nap time, another doing virtual bookkeeping for small businesses, someone else teaching watercolor classes over Zoom. None of them had business degrees. Most of them started with less than $100 and more doubt than confidence. But they all had one thing in common. They'd stopped waiting for the perfect moment and started with the moment they had. The first step felt almost too simple to count. She made a list, not of business ideas, but of things she already did that people asked her about. Recipes she'd adapted for picky eaters, the way she organized her small pantry, how she edited photos on her phone to make ordinary moments look magical. Her handwriting, which friends always complimented, the vintage finds she had an eye for at thrift stores. None of it felt like expertise, but that was the trap, waiting to feel expert before claiming knowledge. She learned something that week that changed her entire approach. The people who need what you offer aren't looking for the most qualified person in the world. They're looking for someone 2 steps ahead of where they are. Someone who remembers what it felt like to be confused. Someone who can explain things without making them feel small. Perfection creates distance. Relatability creates connection. And connection is what turns a skill into income. But knowing where to start and actually starting are separated by a canyon of fear. What if no one wanted what she made? What if people judged her for trying? What if she failed publicly, proving right every doubt she'd ever had about herself? The fear wasn't irrational, it was the same fear that stops most people from ever beginning. The fear that's louder than failure because it speaks in your own voice. Part of her still felt guilty for wanting more, as if ambition had to disappear when motherhood began, as if caring about your own growth somehow diminished your care for others. She'd internalized the message that good mothers sacrifice everything, that wanting something for yourself made you selfish rather than whole. But slowly, through conversations with other women building quiet businesses from home, she started to see it differently. Her children were watching her, and what she was teaching them by pursuing something of her own mattered more than what she was teaching them by staying small. The practical reality was this: she had maybe 2 hours a day when the house was quiet enough to focus, sometimes less, some days none at all. The business advice she found online talked about consistency, content calendars, and growth strategies, all of it assuming time and energy she didn't have. So she did what mothers do best. She adapted. She stopped trying to build a business the way someone without children would build one. And she started building it the only way she could, in fragments, with interruptions, imperfectly. She chose something that didn't require inventory, shipping, or leaving the house. Digital products became her focus, things she could create once and sell repeatedly without adding hours to her day. Printables seemed almost too simple: budgeting sheets, meal planners, cleaning schedules, daily affirmation cards. But the market for them was vast and growing, because people weren't just buying the product, they were buying the order it promised. The feeling of having something under control in a world that often felt chaotic. Her first sale happened on a Tuesday afternoon while she was folding laundry. The notification sound startled her. $5, minus fees, for something she'd made the week before during a thunderstorm that kept the kids inside. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was proof of concept. Proof that something she created had value to a stranger. Proof that this path was real, and not just another distraction from what she should be doing. What surprised her most wasn't the money, it was the message that came with the purchase. A woman from another state, another life entirely, thanking her for making something that finally worked for her brain, for her life, for her specific challenges. In that moment, she understood what she was really building. Not just income, connection. Evidence that her particular way of solving problems mattered to someone other than herself. She almost gave up during the second week. The algorithm didn't favor her. Sales didn't come consistently. She compared herself to people with thousands of followers and forgot that they'd all started exactly where she was, invisible, uncertain, one sale at a time. Then came the doubt, the kind that whispers louder than failure, the kind that tells you to quit before you embarrass yourself further. Maybe success just wasn't meant for someone like her, but quitting required a decision, and she was too tired to make big decisions. So instead of stopping, she just kept going by default, adding one more design, posting one more photo, answering one more question in a Facebook group. Momentum wasn't dramatic, it was just the accumulation of not stopping. And not stopping, it turned out, was enough. She started noticing patterns in what sold and what didn't. People wanted solutions to very specific problems, not generic products that could work for anyone. The more niche she went, the better things performed. Budget planners for single parents. Meal planning templates for families with food allergies. Cleaning schedules for people with ADHD. The specificity didn't limit her audience, it helped the right people find her. 3 months in, she was making enough to cover groceries. 6 months in, it was groceries plus the monthly subscriptions that always made her feel guilty. By month 9, she was contributing meaningfully to household expenses, not equally. Not yet, but enough that her husband stopped asking if this was still just a hobby. Enough that she stopped asking herself the same question. The business grew in ways she didn't expect. People started asking if she did custom work. Others wanted to know if she'd teach them how to do what she did. She created a small course, not because she considered herself an expert, but because she documented her entire learning process and realized that documentation itself was valuable. She charged $37 for it, certain no one would pay. 12 people bought it the first week. What helped her the most wasn't just Canva Pro, though having access to better templates and design elements definitely accelerated things. It was realizing that she didn't need permission to start small, didn't need a perfect brand or a business plan or certainty about where this was going. She tested a few tools before finding what truly worked, and honestly, it changed everything, not because the tools were magic, but because having the right resources removed excuses. This isn't a promotion, it's just something that made the path a little lighter. I'll leave the link below if you want to explore it. But tools were only part of the equation. The real shift happened internally, in how she saw herself. She stopped introducing this as her side project and started calling it her business. She stopped apologizing for spending time on it and started protecting that time the way she protected everything else that mattered. She stopped waiting to feel legitimate and started acting as if she already was. The challenges didn't disappear. There were still days when nothing sold, when motivation evaporated, when she questioned whether any of this was worth the effort. There were technical problems she had to solve through YouTube tutorials at midnight. There were moments of comparison that made her feel impossibly behind. There were people who dismissed what she did because it wasn't a real job, wasn't traditional, wasn't what they would have chosen. But there were also messages from customers that arrived exactly when she needed them, small wins that felt enormous. The growing confidence that came from solving problems she didn't know how to solve a month earlier. The pride of depositing money she'd earned entirely on her own terms. The example she was setting for her children, who now saw entrepreneurship as normal, who watched their mother build something from nothing and learned that starting is always an option. She wished someone had told her earlier that hobbies and income weren't opposites, that the things she did for joy could also create financial freedom without destroying the joy, that monetizing a skill doesn't cheapen it, it validates it, that there's no rule saying you have to choose between being present for your family and building something for yourself. The either-or framework was always false. She learned to recognize the difference between strategic patience and fear-based stalling. Patience is continuing to build while waiting for results. Stalling is waiting for permission that never comes, for confidence that only appears after you've already started, for circumstances to be perfect when perfect isn't possible with small children in the house. She learned to start badly, to iterate quickly, to treat every version as a draft that could be improved rather than a final statement that had to be flawless. The women who succeeded in this space, she noticed, weren't the ones with the most talent or the biggest audiences. They were the ones who stayed consistent when results were slow, who treated rejection as data rather than verdict, who remembered that every successful business was once someone's scary idea that almost didn't happen. They were the ones who gave themselves permission to grow at whatever pace their life allowed, understanding that sustainable progress beats explosive starts that fizzle out. Sometimes, growth doesn't look like progress, it looks like staying. It looks like showing up on days when you don't feel inspired, when sales are flat, when you're tired and doubt is loud. Those are the days that build businesses, the days that separate the people who succeed from the people who almost did. Not because of talent or luck, but because of simple, unglamorous persistence. Her workspace was still her kitchen counter, but it no longer felt like chaos. It felt like possibility. The same space where she made breakfast and helped with homework had become the birthplace of something entirely hers. She didn't need a separate office or a different life. She needed to stop waiting for circumstances to change and start working with the circumstances she had. 1 year in, she hit a milestone that felt surreal. Her business income matched her old salary from the job she'd left when her second child was born. She wasn't working more hours than she had before. She was working smarter, leveraging what she'd learned, focusing on what actually moved the needle. The freedom wasn't just financial, it was temporal, creative, emotional. She could work at midnight or 5 a.m., could take a Tuesday off for a field trip without asking anyone, could pivot her entire business model without approval from a manager. The question wasn't whether she could build something of her own anymore, she already had. The question now was what came next, how to scale without sacrificing presence, how to grow revenue without growing stress, how to turn this into something sustainable rather than something that eventually burns out. These were better problems to have. These were the problems of someone who'd already proven to herself that starting was the hardest part, and she'd done it. When she poured her coffee the next morning, it was still hot because this time, she wasn't rushing, she was building. One design, one sale, one satisfied customer at a time. The guilt had transformed into something else. Pride, purpose, proof that mothers don't have to choose between showing up for others and showing up for themselves. They can do both. Not perfectly. Not without sacrifice or struggle, but absolutely, undeniably, they can do both. The laptop stayed open on the counter now, no longer hidden away like evidence of something shameful. Her children asked questions about what she was working on, started pointing out designs they liked, began to understand that their mother had dimensions beyond the roles they needed her to fill. That lesson alone made everything worth it, teaching them that women can create, earn, build, and grow without permission or apology. She thought about all the years she'd spent believing that her value came only from what she did for others, that asking for anything for herself was selfish, that dreams expired when children arrived. How different her life might have been if someone had told her earlier, your hobbies are not frivolous, your interests are not indulgent. The things you're drawn to are often pointing towards skills the world needs. You don't have to wait until your children are grown, you don't have to wait at all. The message she wished she could send back to herself a year ago was simple. Start messy, start scared, start with whatever time you have, whatever skill you can offer, whatever tiny audience will listen. Start before you feel ready, before you know what you're doing, before the conditions are perfect. Because perfect never comes. Ready is a feeling you earn by beginning, not a prerequisite for beginning. And the business that feels impossible from the outside becomes inevitable once you're inside it, building it, one imperfect day at a time. Tell us what part of this story resonated with you most, and where you're watching from. Your journey might just inspire the next one. Whether you're still in the dreaming phase or already building something of your own. Whether you're terrified or excited or both at once. Know that the path is already here, waiting for you to walk it. Not someday. Today, now exactly as you are, with exactly what you have. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.